Welcome to Exhuming the Truth, a podcast dedicated to cold cases, missing persons, systemic injustices, and the art of forensic science that seeks answers when silence remains. My name is Asha, and I am a forensic scientist and a criminologist, and in each episode we examine the evidence, the systems, and the human stories that are often left behind. This isn't just about true crime. It's about truth, it's about accountability, and it's about giving a voice to those who deserve to be heard. Thank you for being here, and let's jump right in. Hello everybody. Welcome to a new episode of Exhuming the Truth. This is my second last episode before I take a little break or a hiatus, as you will. Not as you will, if you will. What am I talking about? Before my wedding, which is next Friday. So not this Friday coming, next Friday, the 13th, of course. I'm super excited, and I will shut up about it, but not until it's over. So I'm sorry about that. I have a little bit of a housekeeping, which I've decided to turn more into a bit of an update on recent missing persons and cold cases and things going on in Australia that I get questions about. So let's quickly do that. Of course, we have the gorgeous little Gus Lamont, and he disappeared from his family's remote South Australian property in late September 2025. It does not feel like it has been that long, which is insane. So they being South Australia Police, so SA Pol has actually declared this as a major crime now, which I think we all kind of knew it was. We were just waiting for the confirmation, and they've identified a known suspect unrelated to the family. I don't have any more details about that, unfortunately, but the police are emphasising that the parents aren't suspects. Then we have the Jessica... Now, let me try this, okay? Zrinski case. It's Zrinski. I feel like I've said it wrong, but I've done my best. Now, Jessica is from New South Wales, and there is an impending coronial inquest into her and her case. So basically, Jessica went missing in November of 2022. And the authorities have lost contact with one witness who they say is a key witness who had been expected to testify at this impending coronial inquest. And this is obviously raising huge concerns and red flags about this whole inquiry, because it's obviously essential that this person be there. So there's actually still now a $500,000 reward in place for any information that may lead to the conviction of anybody or any information that will assist in finding Jessica. Now, we have, of course, the beautiful backpacker Celine in Tasmania, and we know earlier on in the year they did find some human remains near Arthur River in Tassie. And they have now confirmed that those remains are most likely to be Celine's. And if you don't know about Celine, she vanished in June of 23 while she was hiking in Tassie. And this brings, while incredibly sad, it does bring long-awaited answers to her family after 2 years of uncertainty, but there's a lot more to go into that investigation as well. There's a couple of cold cases I want you to have a little look at, search up if you have some spare time, and let me know what you think, because I'm going to cover them. They're long-standing cold cases, obviously. That's why they're cold. We have the Wanda Beach murders in New South Wales. It was in 1965, and there were two 15-year-old girls, and they were both brutally killed at Wanda Beach. And despite a pretty extensive investigation at that time, it actually remains one of our oldest unsolved homicides. So there's one cold case for you. Another one in Victoria is often labelled as the murders of Margaret and Sienna Tapp. So this is a mother and daughter duo, and they were both found dead in Melbourne, and they were strangled to death. There was obviously no conviction there, and that's why that's gone cold. That was in 1984. Another one in Victoria from 2003, we have Maria Yan, and she was a charity worker, and this murder obviously also remains unsolved, but there is a $1 million reward to help break that case. And finally, another one from Victoria from 1977, the Easy Street murders. This is where two women were actually stabbed to death in Collingwood. So this is a pretty populated area, even in 77, and there was an arrest made in Italy in 2024, which led to a committal hearing, which was held all throughout last year, 2025. But this case is still proceeding through court, but it's very interesting if you wanted to have a little look. And as far as systemic injustices are going at the moment, there's a big issue right now in deaths in custody. So this has a lot to do with Indigenous justice. There's so much going on around that. We can go into that another time. There's, call for action there with Independent Custodial Deaths Authority. What else have we got? We have, that's right. That's what I wanted to talk about. We did do an episode on Andrew Mallard, but this is like the notorious wrongful conviction cases that we have in Australia that also highlight systemic flaws. So the Andrew Mallard case, if you haven't listened to that episode, please do. He was wrongly convicted in Perth for murder and he was exonerated later on. And then we have, of course, the case of Lindy Chamberlain, and she was infamously convicted but later cleared as well. And these both touch on a lot of similar issues in policing and prosecution and bias and things like that. So a few things to get you thinking, nothing more, nothing less. I will cover those cases that we spoke about. Just a couple of things that I wanted you to sort of have a look at if you had the time. I have a lot of people asking me about cases that they might be interested in, that they might not have heard of. So hopefully you have a look into one or multiple of those cases that I've just shared with you. But today's episode is for a young man called Luke Hazelwood, and we're going to get right into this. Before we start, I want to preface that everything that we discuss today is going to fall under the typical alleged category. This is information that we've been provided with from a close friend of Luke's. There are no close contact family members that we could liaise with, I guess, unfortunately, in regards to Luke. And this is a very good friend of his who has been super kind to share as much insight as possible to help find Luke. So please listen with intention. Please share this far and wide, and let's help find this young man. Where is Luke Hazelwood, missing from Lancelin, WA? Today's episode is about a man who is more than a missing persons report. Like all of our other cases, he is more than a media line and more than a rumour. Today we're talking about Luke Hazelwood, a father, a friend, a man who loved karaoke, all the fun things. He sang Tennessee Whiskey by Chris Stapleton like he meant it, and he vanished in the days leading up to Christmas. Luke was last linked to the coastal town of Lancelin, which is around 130 kilometres north of Perth. But to understand what may have happened here, we first need to understand who Luke is. And we're doing that today through the eyes of someone who truly knew him. And today's episode, I'm going to share some answers that were provided by one of Luke's close friends. Now, to give a bit of context about this case, Luke Hazelwood was 32 years old when he was last seen. And in this time that he's been missing, he's actually missed his daughter's first day of year one, which is incredibly sad. He was last seen on Christmas Eve at the Lancelin Sands Hotel, and he had this car, or one he was using. I couldn't get clarification around this. I think it was a hire car, but it was a Ssangyong Stavik station sedan. That was a tongue twister. And that car was the one he was driving at the time, and that was also found abandoned the next day in the hotel car park at Lancelin Sands Hotel. Now, when we're talking about Luke's close friend who we had a chat with, Luke actually came into their lives toward the end of 2024, and these friends met at the Alexander Bar and Bistro, which was a place that would become one of Luke's regular haunts. And from the beginning, Luke was described as magnetic, and he was the kind of person who seemed to vibrate with energy. He was outgoing. He was confident and always ready to go out rather than stay in. So he sounds like a big ball of fun. And whether it was dinner and drinks at the Alexander or heading into the city to sing at the karaoke bar, Luke wasn't someone who sat quietly in the corner. He got up and he sang, and his go-to song, like I said, was Tennessee Whiskey by Chris Stapleton. What a banger. I love that song so much. Now, Luke's friends said that Luke showed up for his friends and he made people laugh and he felt alive. But over the duration of their friendship, there were subtle shifts that began to appear, and these, might mean nothing, but they also might mean something. So when we're talking about the changes, his friend describes it as watching someone fracture in slow motion. At first, it was small changes in priorities, stress that lingered, restlessness, a creeping paranoia that sometimes sat just beneath the surface. And then the shifts became more pronounced. There were days where Luke was described as being chaotic and had racing thoughts and was unable to settle. And he was kind of acting like he was looking over his shoulder as though something or someone was after him. And on other days, he would flip back into himself and he was calm and funny and grounded and like nothing could touch him. Those were the moments that his close friends and family held on to, but addiction began tightening its grip. Now, we don't judge a missing person. We've been through this before. Drugs became central in Luke's life and his world narrowed and bills fell away and responsibilities slipped. So his routine became, pretty much one the same as the next. He was going to the casino, the pub, staying busy so he didn't have to sit alone with his thoughts. And it's important to say something here gently and clearly that, substance dependence doesn't erase someone's humanity. It complicates it, yes, and it distorts it, yes, but it can magnify underlying mental health struggles, particularly paranoia and psychosis, when stimulants are involved. And Luke actually did have a history of mental health struggles, and that included previous suicide attempts, and this context certainly matters. Now, around late November to early December 2025, Luke was evicted from his rental, which was in Two Rocks, and he didn't have a permanent address after that. He couch surfed. He stayed in hotels. His mailing address was listed as his friend's home so that he was able to receive his mail. He did, however, previously have quite a good job, and he worked for St. Jude's Healthcare Services as a behaviour therapist. And in doing so, he specialised in paediatrics and worked with kids aged 3 to 21. But at the time, he was actually off work due to illness following a staph infection, and he was receiving workers' compensation from this. And this is critical because he was actually expecting a workers' compensation payout on the 7th of January of 2026. Now, this payout would have allowed him to repay significant debts that he owed to several people, and he had been promising repayment dates that never materialised, not because he didn't have the intent to pay, but because he simply didn't have the means yet. Now, this payout that was set to come on the 7th of January represented relief and stability and a reset, really, and he was reportedly, so his mates say, super excited about this, and also super excited about his plans for Christmas because he was supposed to be having lunch on Boxing Day with his daughter Ella and his 2 stepchildren and his ex-wife. And he was really looking forward to it, especially seeing his daughter, because he was stressed about not having stable housing, particularly because he wanted to have a stable home where his daughter could come and stay the night with him and things like that. But he did have plans and he did have intentions, and he did have a future orientation beyond Christmas Eve when he went missing. And that's where the timeline tightens. Now, when we get into last contact, Luke was seen by this friend that helped us put this together on the 15th of December 2025. Now, this friend missed a call from Luke at 5:33 a.m. on the 23rd of December. Now, there was another sighting placing Luke on the 22nd of December at a house in Dianella. And then on the early morning of the 24th of December, multiple alarming contacts occurred. So Luke reportedly actually called his girlfriend, stating that he was quote unquote going on holiday. Now, this is where it gets a bit wonky. He states that he was in a police chase and that he allegedly had a significant quantity of drugs on him. And he said that if he was caught, he would be locked up for a really long time. Now, a different individual received a voicemail between 4 a.m. and 5 a.m. on the 24th. And the message was, quote unquote, "Please call me. I'm in a police chase. I need help, it's urgent," and then silence. Now, when we're talking about where he was last known to be, it's Lancelin, and this is an unusual location for him. So, according to his friend, he had never mentioned knowing the area or going there or being there, and they didn't believe that Luke had actually spent time there before. And for someone who had confirmed Boxing Day plans, for someone expecting a financial payout in 2 weeks, and for someone without known ties to the region of Lancelin, Lancelin was unusual for Luke Hazelwood. And I want to jump now into the reporting delays, because this was something that came up when I was made aware that Luke Hazelwood was missing, and I posted this pretty quickly. You guys jumped in the comments and recognised that, there was a bit of discrepancy in the times, and he was missing on the 24th of December. The car wasn't noted to be... Well, no one noticed that the car was there for a little bit of time, and then the report took some time, and it was a bit of a mess. So another issue that deeply concerns those who are close to Luke, like his friends and, his ex-wife, who is the mother of his daughter. His ex-wife attempted to report him missing on the 26th of December. So this is 2 days after he's seen or heard from. Now, she was reportedly told that it did not meet the criteria to commence a search because there was no evidence of harm and no evidence of death. Now, official reports later state that he was not reported missing until the 5th of January 2026, which sounds about accurate because I believe it was January when I posted this. So there was quite a discrepancy in the time. Now, for context, Luke had previously received welfare checks during the concerning periods in his life, the lower times. And the question becomes, why was this time different? Now, I want to talk about a sensitive topic, but one that I openly discuss all the time, and that's about mental health and Luke's mental state at the time of his disappearance. And Luke was clearly under enormous pressure. It's not to say that, the whole situation is squeaky clean and, of course, things could have been done differently. We're not here to discuss that. We're here to kind of analyse his mental state at the time and what this could mean for him right now. The pressures that he was under, well, there's several. Housing instability. He had significant debts. He was dependent on substances. He had underlying mental health vulnerabilities. Christmas is, of course, a very high-risk emotional period. Now, there was also the anticipation of a large financial payout and the alleged involvement in a police chase. Now, when someone is in a state of stimulant-induced paranoia, combined with all of this acute stress and their perception of threat, it amplifies, basically, and it gets distorted. And we also have to remain open to another possibility. If he believed he was in a police chase, was it verified, things like that? I haven't been able to get any verification. Doesn't mean it's not true, just another thing to think about. He could have been experiencing a psychological crisis, and these distinctions certainly matter in missing persons investigations, so I will continue to try and follow that up. Now, again, Luke wasn't just a drug user. He was a father and a friend. He had a great job before he got unwell as a trained behaviour therapist. What a great job for a young man like Luke. Someone who is able to work confidently with vulnerable children. That tells me that Luke had a kind heart, and, he was a friend who sang karaoke and made rooms laugh, and he made people feel good. And, people are not their worst chapter. And when someone disappears under complex mental health and substance conditions, it's even more vital that there's urgency applied early, in my opinion, because this huge vulnerability that he has, or vulnerabilities that he has or had at that time, it significantly increases his risk. And that discrepancy between times of when he was last seen to when they actually took in the report, it's very concerning. Now, where does this stand right now? He remains missing. Now, if you were in Lancelin or staying there or know anyone in the area or surrounding coastal areas even, on the early morning of December 24th, 2025, if you saw a hire vehicle behaving erratically, if you heard or witnessed any police activity that aligns with this timeline, your information might matter, even small details. You're welcome to send me a private message, a text, an email. I don't know if I was able to delete that little bark in the background of my dog just then, who decided to chime in. But I am going to get into the forensic segment, which is my fave, and I'm going to talk about some really important factors surrounding Luke's disappearance. So let's just take a big step back from all of the information I've just loaded onto you and look at this case through a forensic and behavioural lens to analyse the patterns that are going on and what we're dealing with. Now, when we assess a disappearance, what's going on, like Luke Hazelwood's, we examine 5 core domains. So first up, we have mental state, which we touched on. We have environmental factors, which we'll talk about, if you're unfamiliar with Lancelin. We have the behavioural deviation from the baseline, the risk amplification, and then, of course, the opportunity and third-party involvement. So let's walk through them. First up, we've got mental state. Now, I'm talking mental state at the time of his disappearance because everything in the lead up to that final sighting is vital. Now, Luke was experiencing multiple destabilising pressures all at one time. We touched on those about his housing. He was evicted, he had financial debt, he was anticipating a payout, he was dependent on substances. There's a documented history there of suicide attempts, there's heightened paranoia, it's Christmas period, which is an emotional time. Now, the early morning voicemail stating he was in a police chase and had a significant quantity of drugs on him is critical because from a forensic psychology perspective, there are 2 primary interpretations. So if we call them scenario A and B, scenario A is the threat's real. So there was an active pursuit or a perceived imminent threat or imminent arrest rather, and scenario B where the threat was perceived but it wasn't objectively occurring. So if B was the case and there was substance-induced paranoia, particularly stimulant-related, this can produce delusions and an exaggerated sense of pursuit. So distinguishing between those 2 possibilities requires confirmation of police activity like we spoke about. That's just police activity in the area at the reported time would be very useful. Cell tower data, vehicle tracking, if the hire vehicle was GPS monitored, these are all very pivotal. Now, number 2, we have environmental context. Let's talk about Lancelin. It's a coastal town, and does it have some sand dunes? I believe, and I could be wrong, but I do believe they are the biggest sand dunes in Western Australia. I could be wrong, but I have been there. I've taken my kids there. I've done some sandboarding. Great fun. But there's really not much out there unless you're planning on camping, fishing, going on the sand dunes. So it's sand dunes, bushland, and ocean. And it presents quite a few environmental risk variables. It's very remote. There's a lot of cliff edges. There's a lot of water hazards. There's, huge expansions of dunes that can obscure vehicles or remains. And there's quite a few areas that have limited night visibility, just for observational purposes. And if someone was driving erratically in the early hours of the morning under stress or fatigue or substance influence, then accidental harm can also be a statistical possibility, but the environmental risk doesn't eliminate the potential for a third-party interaction. That's very important. Now, number 3, the behavioural deviation from his baseline. Now, Luke had confirmed plans for Boxing Day with his daughter, like we mentioned, and he was anticipating a financial payout within 2 weeks of that, and that would relieve a lot of the pressures that he was carrying at that time. Now, from a behavioural standpoint, individuals expecting imminent relief, like this payout, they're statistically less likely to engage in planned self-harm acts in this anticipation window, if that's what we can call it. It doesn't make it impossible, but it does shift the probability quite a bit on its axis. And additionally, he didn't tell close friends that he was planning to travel to Lancelin, and he reportedly didn't have any known ties to the area. So this sudden and uncharacteristic travel that he has made without disclosure is a huge behavioural deviation worth examining, and makes you wonder, was he fleeing something, following someone, meeting up with someone, responding impulsively in a moment of crisis? All these things we need to go into. Now, number 4, we have the risk amplification factors. We've gone through them 500 times: substance use, paranoia, debt, the potential for drugs to be involved, all of these things. And when someone owes money in a drug-related sense, it's very different to, owing a bill. The risk isn't purely internal, if you will. It can become interpersonal, it can expand, and we have to acknowledge that drug-related debt can introduce coercion, threats, violence, all of these things. But in this particular review, we're not ignoring risk vectors simply because they're uncomfortable. We had to touch on that. But we're moving on now. The reporting gap. Now, his ex-wife reportedly attempted to file the missing persons report on the 26th, so that would have had a discrepancy of 2 days. Now, a search was not commenced in that time, and in high-risk adult cases like this, particularly where there is a history of suicide attempts and substance dependence, early intervention statistically improves recovery outcomes. It's huge. I'm a big believer in throwing everything all in, going super hard, super early, and not stopping. Unfortunately, the government does not agree with me. So this delay between the initial concern period, that 48 hours, and formal classification, which I don't think was until January, it's reduced the time-sensitive opportunities for lots of things like wheel imprints, shoe imprints, CCTV retrieval, vehicle tracking, witness canvassing, coastal search patterns, just so many things in that first 24 to 72 hours matter profoundly. I don't know if you've watched the show The First 48. It basically is like your risk, if you have not solved or started to solve a case in the first 48 hours, the risk of solving that case drops dramatically. The potential to solve that case drops dramatically after that 48-hour period. This is a working theory. And on working theories, I've made a tiny little one. It's not speculative, but it is from a forensic standpoint. And I've categorized it into 3 separate sections. So, of course, we have accidental death. Now, this is where the possibility linked to the impaired driving he could have been conducting, if that's the right word, as well as environmental exposure and, this fleeing of his perceived pursuit. Then, of course, number 2, we have self-harm during this crisis period, if you will, particularly if paranoia has escalated to hopelessness or even perceived inescapability. And, of course, the third one is the third-party involvement, and that would be linked to debt, drugs, even opportunistic violence that wasn't pre-planned, or interpersonal conflict. And at present, there's insufficient publicly available evidence to conclusively prioritise one over the other, which means this case is obviously remaining open in analytical terms. I will do a probability matrix on this, I think, because this is very interesting to me. There's lots of things in this case that stand out to me, and I think we can go deeper on a geographical level. On a statistical level, I think there's a lot that we can do. But my final forensic observation, if you will, Luke's disappearance did not occur in a vacuum. And by that I mean it actually occurred at the intersection of so many vulnerabilities: the mental health vulnerability, the addiction vulnerability, the financial strain that so many of us are under, in Australia right now, let alone overseas. This is a huge thing that you can relate to. Even social instability and his high emotion holiday period, where he is anticipating spending time with his daughter but isn't quite there yet. And that convergence increases unpredictability. But unpredictability does not mean inevitability. Someone knows something. I'm a firm believer in it in every single case, and in cases like this, small inconsistencies like a vehicle sighting, a timestamp, a half-remembered conversation, these little things, they often become the thread that unravels the truth that we desperately need. I have made a geographic search and probability analysis. I'm going to save that for Thursday night's episode because it does go quite deep. And I'm going to make search recommendations off of that and potentially conduct a search according to that and how I have put that. So I won't overload you with too much, statistical information today. I just wanted to get the facts out there. I have to thank greatly Luke's very, very kind and loving friend who has reached out and asked for assistance, and then in turn given us such vulnerable and honest answers so that we are able to give as much detail as we can and as much context as we can to get the help that we need around this case to find Luke and find answers. So I appreciate you all so very much. Thank you so much for being here and for listening. As always, please try to share this episode if you can. Luke is very important, and all of our missing persons cases are very important, and we need a community that involves you. You might feel like, you're listening to this and I'm just talking into space, which is kind of what it feels like while I'm over here. But when I get the feedback and the messages and people sharing things with names and images on it, it really gives me hope that we're making changes. And I know we are. So thank you so much. And yeah, I hope you have enjoyed it here. This is Where is Luke Hazelwood, missing from Lancelin, Perth, WA. Thank you so much for being here. If you have enjoyed it and you are not across all of our social platforms, please do so. We are also on TikTok and YouTube. Our YouTube account is also looking a little bit sad right now, but we're doing our best. My name is Asha Walther. I am your host, forensic scientist, criminologist, and human rights advocate. Have a beautiful day.